Hey folks, Brandon Vigliarolo with the Register, and I'm here today with former FTC Chief Technologist Neil Chilson to talk about this AI roadmap that a bipartisan group of senators just released today. Neil, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I know we were originally going to have you on to talk about Senator Klobuchar's bills that are dealing with election security and election guidelines around AI, which I believe you testified in relation to before Congress. But then this AI roadmap came out, which it seems almost like, includes that element as kind of an area that it covers a bit. So I wanted to kind of ask you more about that broader effort too. So looking at that AI roadmap, which I wrote about earlier, and people can read on the Register if they want to read more about it, what was your take on what it contained?
Well, this is a culmination of a bipartisan effort led by Senator Schumer. Lots of informal meetings that were, closed door, invite only meetings, and I think I'm relieved to see it out. It's nice to see Congress step into this role. The executive branch, the Biden administration had this really long, historically unprecedented lengthy executive order that laid out a sort of whole of government approach to artificial intelligence. So it's nice to see Congress, saying, hey, we have a role to play here too. And, the report that came out today touches on a lot of topic areas, including AI and elections. But it generally takes a pretty positive, incremental, sector specific approach to AI that I think is the right approach. And so I was heartened to see that.
Right. So you think that the approach to kind of, basically it seemed that a lot of the legislative responsibility was more like, nope, we want committees to handle this and experts in this particular legislative area. So it looked like they would rather have a whole bunch of small rules being passed in one big omnibus AI regulation, right?
Yeah, and I think that makes a ton of sense for artificial intelligence. It's such a broad, general purpose technology. We're talking about this because of this new generative AI technology, but AI is much broader than that.
Right.
And in some ways, you can kind of think of it as computing generally. And so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to have a single rule for all computing. We might want to focus on specific uses and talk about like, how does a government, what role do they play in regulating this specific space? And it looks like that's what the Schumer roadmap is embracing, that type of use-based sector-specific approach.
Right. And I know one of the big takeaway headlines, I think, from this thing that a lot of people have been hitting on is this $32 billion a year in annual funding for non-defense AI research, right? And I think this idea wasn't new to the report, new to the roadmap, right? It was proposed by, I think, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence back in 2021. But I guess my question is, do you think $32 billion a year is feasible right now? And as far as I understand, right, the 2021 guidelines wanted this in place by 2026. I hesitate to believe we can actually allocate $32 billion for AI research in the next few months before FY26.
Spending issues are always really difficult. The House is razor's edge as far as people who might want to move ahead with any advance increase in spending. So I do think that's a difficult hill to climb. Ultimately, will that money be spent well or not? There's probably a bunch of things that government could use it well for. There's probably some things that government might, not use it well for. But to me, that's less important than an overall framework that says, hey, we're going to let industry and entrepreneurs continue to lead the innovation that they've been driving so far. We're not going to try to lock it down with specific rules. And it looks like Schumer's approach is, hey, let's do government investment in this space, but let's also have industry continue to drive the innovation that's made the U.S. A leader in this technology.
Yeah, right. We're already doing, it seems like a pretty good job, right? All the big AI companies seem to be headquartered here. So why derail that, right?
Right.
Now you've said you believe that this is the correct approach to take, right? This kind of by committee sort of thing. But as I noted in my article, some activists, involved in this, in the AI and privacy and everything scene, have basically said that they see this as basically a giant handout to the big tech industry. Do you think this is kind of in a lot of ways very supportive of the way things are business as usual, or do you think change will actually come from this document?
So I think this is a continuation of, let's find the gaps that where in AI or where AI might bring up new policy issues in specific areas, and let's fill those gaps. when government's spending billions and billions of dollars, there's always a giant risk of handouts to well-positioned players,
Right.
that aren't well-deserved. And so that is a risk. That's something that we should continue to watch. But this doesn't raise the sort of concerns that I would have if it had taken an approach that tried to establish, for example, a single AI regulator.
Mhm.
That's a situation in which you get the biggest companies having an outsized influence in the structure of the regulation, the type of regulatory capture that I would be really worried at. To the contrary, I think this roadmap leaves plenty of room for small companies. It has plenty of room for open source. It appears like, unlike some other bills, for example, California is considering some bills right now that would, in effect, shut out open source competitors. And so I think there's plenty of room under this roadmap for continued innovation by small guys and even by nonprofits and individual developers. This is a space where individual developers can actually have an outsized impact. So
yeah,
I think there's lots of room for innovation here.
Well, great, fantastic. So I know one of the things they also mentioned, in there was they called for a federal level privacy regulation, right? I know there was a bill proposed just recently in Congress to that end, and there's been multiple attempts to pass this sort of thing. I mean, do you think, from your reading of the timeline or the proposal, right? I mean, does it support the bill that's currently exists right now, or is this more of like a just generally supporting that kind of concept?
I think it's generally supporting congressional action on privacy.
Mm-hmm.
This has been something that has gained at least verbal, nominal support over time as the states have continued to pass their own privacy bills. And it seems like having 50 different standards for not just a nationwide, but a global technology doesn't make a ton of sense. It does make sense to have a federal rule that kind of sets a single standard across that. Now, doing it right is challenging, and maybe that's why this roadmap does not specifically endorse anything in particular, because depending on what the requirements are of a privacy bill, you could have a detrimental effect on AI innovation.
Right.
So, AI, these large language models and other things are trained on large amounts of data. If you have restrictions on how much data you can keep or repurpose to do this kind of training, you might not be able to create the kinds of new services using AI for your customers that you didn't know that you might want to build, when you collected that information. So I think there are some restrictions here. And then in addition, and this is an old fight that's been going on long before ChatGPT came around, the ideas around algorithmic bias and restrictions on maybe having to have check in with the government or audit before you release an algorithm. Those have been sort of repurposed now. We're now talking about that in the context of these large language models. And those types of pre-certification or having to prove that your algorithm is not biased in ways that will satisfy politicians, I think is another potential lever that would restrict AI innovation. And so those are things that have been in privacy bills. I think the current, the latest release has some of that language. And so figuring out how that would affect AI, I think is really important before, Congress runs ahead and does something like that. Right.
But I mean, of course, right, given Congress running ahead and doing anything, right, it's May 2024, right?
Sure.
I feel like, my next kind of question on this whole thing is, this is a great proposal package, right? At the very least, we're getting some idea out there of hey, let's maybe get the ball rolling on some legislative efforts to this end. Is that ball going to roll at this time of year, in this kind of year? Are we stuck kind of at the point we're at until the election, you think, or do you think this is something that can actually gain some traction in the next few months?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, there's a huge amount of content in there, a lot of activity that the roadmap plans, and I don't think, when I read it, I don't think that they think they're going to reach the destination by the end of this Congress, right? There might be some steps along that road that they can take this Congress, but this is going to be a longer effort. And so I wouldn't expect for most of the proposals that are in the document that they would be enacted in the next, or even addressed. Again, the roadmap does not specifically say that there need to be laws for X, Y, and Z. It says, it often says the committees need to consider how to bring in stakeholders and discuss this certain set of issues,
Right.
to identify whether or not there needs to be new laws.
No, but I know one of the things that Schumer did say he wanted, and he didn't give a timetable for this, but he did mention election security and election AI risks, right? And that's an obvious one given what the time period we're in. Given you've got some knowledge of Klobuchar's bills, right? And I know you've also, your institute that you're part of recently penned an article or is working on a 4-part series on election AI security risks, right? Yeah. I mean, do you think that that's the sort of thing we could see action on between now and then? I mean, do these Klobuchar bills go a certain way toward protecting us and protecting the integrity of the election system a bit?
Well, the Klobuchar bills are very focused on deep fake concerns that that politicians in particular have, that, this technology will be used to put words in their mouth or to edit together something that they didn't say in the past. I think those bills have two problems. One, that problem, as our recent research shows, has not surfaced nearly as much as it's been talked about in the media. So our AI and elections tracker identified 7,500 plus media articles since January 21st of this year talking about the potential of AI to upend the election. Mm-hmm. But out of all of those discussions, we only found 3 actual incidents, the most famous of them being the Biden robocall that happened in New Hampshire. And none of them seem to have had any effect on voters. Now, that could change. That's why we're going to continue this tracking. But it's not clear that generative AI is creating some sort of new problem of misinformation. We've long had misinformation concerns in elections, but they don't take sophisticated tools often to have to pass something along that's false. I mean, some of the most effective ones have just been putting a fake quote under a picture of Obama and saying that he said this, right? And so,
these kind of lies are hardly, this is hardly a new problem that has arisen. Like fraud has been fraud since, before the invention of the printing press. So, well, here's hoping we can get some action on this year. And, at the very least, maybe we shouldn't be as worried about AI interfering with elections as we need to be. So either way, here's hoping we get something done soon with AI regulations, be them piecemeal or otherwise. So, Neil, thanks so much for coming on and speaking with me about this today.
Thanks for having me.